The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the peaceful town of Maplewood. Henry Carter leaned against the wooden fence that surrounded his property, sipping his morning coffee and admiring the mural that had transformed his once plain barrier into a breathtaking piece of art. The painting depicted the rich history of the town, its founding, the old railway station, and portraits of historical figures who had shaped Maplewood into what it was today. It was more than just a painting. It was a legacy commissioned by the town's historical society to honor its roots. Henry had lived on this land for decades, long before Maplewood had become a hub for retirees and suburban newcomers. He preferred the simpler things in life, working in his garden, chatting with old neighbors, and keeping his property just the way he liked it. But ever since the new Homeowners Association, HOA, President Karen Whitmore had taken charge, things had been changing, and not for the better. Karen was the kind of person who believed that uniformity equaled perfection. Every house had to be the same shade of beige, lawns needed to be trimmed to exactly 2 inches, and her biggest pet peeve, no unsanctioned decorations were allowed. She had already issued warnings to people for having garden gnomes, colorful mailboxes, and even hanging plants. Henry had heard through the grapevine that she had her eye on his mural, but he had dismissed it. Surely, even she wouldn't be foolish enough to tamper with a piece of town history. That assumption shattered the moment he stepped outside that morning and saw what had happened. His mural, the town's mural, was gone. In its place was a fresh coat of dull, gray paint. The rich blues, deep reds, and golden hues of the historical masterpiece had been erased overnight, replaced by the color of a storm cloud. Henry's hands tightened around his coffee mug as his heart pounded in disbelief. Who would do such a thing? Then, as if summoned by his rage, Karen herself strutted down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, wearing her signature smug expression. "Oh, Henry," she called out, feigning surprise. "I see you've noticed. I took care of that dreadful eyesore for you. No need to thank me." Henry's jaw clenched. "You did this?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. Karen scoffed. "Of course. The HOA guidelines clearly state that all fences must be in neutral tones. That garish display was unacceptable. Consider it a favor." She smiled, pleased with herself. "Now your fence finally matches the rest of the neighborhood." Henry stared at her, struggling to keep his temper in check. He wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but one thing was certain. Karen had no idea what she had just done. She had painted over a mural sanctioned by the town's historical society, and she was about to regret it. Henry took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady the storm brewing inside him. Karen stood there, oblivious to the gravity of her mistake, tapping her pen against her clipboard as if she had just completed a routine neighborhood improvement. "You do realize," Henry said, his voice dangerously calm, "that mural wasn't just some garish display, as you put it." Karen let out a dramatic sigh. "Henry, I know you're attached to your little art project, but this neighborhood has rules. You can't just paint whatever you want on a fence. It sets a bad precedent." She glanced down at her notes. "Honestly, I'm surprised you didn't receive a violation notice earlier." Henry narrowed his eyes. "Karen, that mural was commissioned by the town's historical society. It wasn't just mine. It belonged to the entire community. It was approved by the mayor, the town council, and even had a special exemption in the HOA's own bylaws." Karen blinked, her smug expression faltering for just a moment. "Well," she huffed, recovering quickly, "I wasn't informed of any special exemptions." Henry crossed his arms. "Maybe because you didn't bother to check before taking a paint roller to history." Karen's lips pursed in irritation. "Regardless, it's done now, and honestly, Henry, you should be thanking me. That thing was an eyesore. Now your fence is neat, clean, and properly in line with the HOA's aesthetic standards. She gestured proudly at the soulless gray paint. Much better, don't you think? Henry looked at his fence, then back at Karen. He could hardly believe the nerve of this woman. No, Karen, I don't think so. Karen rolled her eyes, already losing interest in the conversation. If you want to discuss it further, you're welcome to submit a formal complaint to the HOA board, but I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for them to side with you. She gave him a tight, condescending smile. Anyway, have a lovely day, Henry. And with that, she turned on her heel and marched away. Henry stood there, his fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't just about the mural. It was about respect. Respect for history, for art, and for the people who had built this town. Karen had no right to erase that. A slow smile crept onto Henry's face. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming. Henry spent the rest of the morning packing his yard, running through every possible reaction in his head. He could go straight to the mayor, call the town council, even rally the neighbors. But no, that wasn't enough. Karen had done this in secret, with no warning, no discussion. She needed to learn a lesson in a way that she'd never forget. By mid-afternoon, news of the vandalized mural had spread. His phone rang non-stop with calls from angry residents, local artists, and members of the Historical Society. Even the mayor's assistant left a voicemail, her voice dripping with disbelief. Henry, we're looking into this, but she did what? Henry wasn't the only one furious. The mural had been a source of pride for the town, a symbol of its deep-rooted history. And Karen had wiped it out overnight as if it meant nothing. But what really lit a fire in Henry was the email he received later that evening. It was from the Historical Society's legal team, informing him that the mural had been registered as a protected historical artwork, meaning that its destruction carried serious legal consequences. Henry's lips curled into a slow, satisfied grin. Karen had painted over something that she was never allowed to touch. And now she was about to face the consequences. By the next morning, Henry had already begun setting things in motion. He made a few calls to the local newspaper, to a well-connected town historian, and most importantly, to the lawyer handling the mural's protection status. Within hours, the issue was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was a scandal. Meanwhile, Karen continued her reign of terror, oblivious to the growing storm. That very afternoon, Henry watched from his porch as she handed out violation notices to his neighbors. One for a child's chalk drawing on a driveway, another for a slightly overgrown flower bed. She strutted around with the authority of a queen, completely unaware that her kingdom was crumbling beneath her. Henry leaned back in his chair, sipping his sweet tea with a knowing smirk. She had no idea what was coming, but she'd find out soon enough. The next morning, Henry awoke to the sound of his phone vibrating non-stop. He smirked, already guessing what the messages were about. Sure enough, as he scrolled through his notifications, he saw emails from town officials, messages from furious locals, and a particularly delightful voicemail from the mayor herself. Henry, call me back as soon as you get this. We have a major problem, and it's all because of that HOA woman. She really screwed up this time. Henry stretched, taking his time to pour himself a cup of coffee before dialing back. Morning, Mayor, he said, his tone relaxed. Sounds like you've had an eventful start to your day. You could say that, she huffed. Do you have any idea how many complaints my office has received in the last 24 hours? And I just got off the phone with the Historical Society's legal team. They are furious. Apparently, your mural was not only protected, but it was also tied to a state grant that required its preservation. Do you know what that means, Henry? Henry chuckled. It means Karen just destroyed government-protected property. Exactly, the mayor snapped. And now we're looking at fines, potential legal action, and the worst part. The town could lose funding if this isn't corrected. This woman has single-handedly jeopardized our standing with the State Preservation Board. Henry let out a low whistle. Well, that does sound like a major problem. Oh, don't act like you didn't see this coming, the mayor groaned. Look, I need to handle this before it turns into a full-blown PR disaster. The Historical Society is demanding an immediate meeting. And Karen, well, she's in for one hell of a wake-up call. Henry grinned. Tell me when and where, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Later that afternoon, Henry arrived at Town Hall, where an emergency meeting was already underway. The conference room was packed with town officials, historical society representatives, and local residents who had caught wind of the scandal. And in the center of it all sat Karen, arms crossed, her usual smugness replaced with growing irritation. This is absolutely ridiculous, she scoffed as the mayor slammed a thick folder of legal documents onto the table. I was just enforcing the HOA's rules. That mural was an eyesore. You vandalized a town-commissioned artwork, the mayor shot back. And you violated multiple state and local preservation laws in the process. Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, please, what's the worst that can happen? A little fine? I'll have the HOA cover it. A tense silence filled the room. Then the mayor smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Oh, Karen, you really don't understand what you've done, do you? Henry leaned back in his chair, enjoying every second of it. Karen was about to realize just how deep a hole she had dug for herself. Karen sat stiffly in her chair, her confidence cracking as the mayor continued flipping through the legal documents in front of her. The room was dead silent except for the sound of pages turning, each one another nail in Karen's coffin. Let's go over what you've done, shall we? The mayor said, her voice dripping with restrained fury. First, you defaced a town-sanctioned historical mural. Second, that mural was protected under state preservation laws. Third, and this is my personal favorite, your little stunt has put our town at risk of losing a $50,000 historical preservation grant, money that was specifically awarded because of that mural. Karen's face paled. Wait, what? Henry fought to keep his expression neutral, but inside he was practically giddy. This was better than he could have planned. You heard me, the mayor said sharply. Because of your actions, the Historical Society is threatening legal action unless the mural is restored. And since you were acting in your role as HOA president when you did this, you are personally responsible for rectifying the damage. Karen sputtered. This is outrageous. The HOA has rules, I was just enforcing them. A deep voice from across the table cut through her protests. Actually, you weren't. All heads turned to the man who had spoken, Roger Delaney, a senior member of the town council. He adjusted his glasses and tapped on a copy of the HOA bylaws. Section 12 B specifically states that historical and town-sanctioned installations are exempt from HOA aesthetic guidelines. That mural was legally protected. You, Mrs. Whitmore, acted outside your authority. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The mayor leaned forward. And that brings us to the next point. Because of this, the HOA is fully liable for the cost of restoring the mural. But since it was your decision, Karen, the HOA board will be deciding whether you will be financially responsible for the cost. Henry barely stifled a chuckle. Oh, this was rich. Corinne gripped the edge of the table. That's absurd. You can't expect me to pay for this. It was just a fence, a little paint. The Historical Society's lawyer, a no-nonsense woman in a sharp navy suit, finally spoke. It wasn't just a little paint. It was an irreplaceable historical piece. And from our estimates, restoration could cost anywhere between $30,000 to $40,000. Corinne nearly fell out of her chair. You're joking. The lawyer didn't blink. Not at all. And if the restoration isn't completed to our satisfaction, we'll be pursuing legal action against both you and the HOA. Silence heavy, suffocating. Henry could see Corinne's fingers shaking as she clenched them into fists. She looked like she was about to explode. But Henry wasn't done yet. No, not by a long shot. He had a plan to make sure she felt every ounce of the humiliation she had brought upon herself. And it was going to be glorious. Corinne stormed out of town hall after the meeting, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and panic. Henry, leaning casually against the railing outside, watched with amusement as she fumbled for her car keys. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice laced with mock sympathy. Corinne whipped around, eyes blazing. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You and your stupid mural." Henry chuckled. "Oh no, Corinne, this is your fault. You took it upon yourself to paint over something that didn't belong to you. Actions have consequences." Corinne scoffed. "You think you've won? I'll figure something out. The HOA will back me up." Henry crossed his arms. "Oh, I wouldn't be so sure about that. You might want to check your email when you get home." She narrowed her eyes, but Henry just smiled and strolled away, whistling to himself. What Corinne didn't know was that Henry had already spoken to several key HOA board members after the meeting. The news of her reckless actions had spread like wildfire, and many of them were not happy. In fact, there was already talk of removing her as president. But Henry's real masterpiece was just beginning. That night, he made another round of calls, this time to the local news. The town paper was already covering the scandal, but Henry wanted something bigger. The story was too good to stay local. It needed to go viral. And the next morning it did. The headline on the regional news site read, "HOA President Destroys Historical Mural, Faces Massive Legal Trouble." The article outlined everything: how the mural was commissioned by the town, its historical significance, the preservation laws Corinne had violated, and of course the outrage from the community. But the real cherry on top, the article included before and after pictures of the fence. On one side, the stunning mural full of color and rich history. On the other, Corinne's dull, gray, lifeless paint job. It was bad. Social media lit up with fury. People from all over town, and even beyond, blasted Corinne in the comments. Some called for her resignation. Others mocked her with memes comparing her to a cartoon villain. And then, the final nail in the coffin. One of the town's biggest local businesses, a historic inn that prided itself on supporting preservation efforts, publicly announced that they were withdrawing their sponsorship from the HOA. By midday, Corinne was drowning in calls, emails, and much to Henry's delight, demands for her to step down as HOA president. And Henry. He sat back with his coffee, watching it all unfold with a satisfied grin. But there was still one more piece of revenge to come. And it was going to be perfect. By the time Corinne fully realized how deep in trouble she was, it was too late. The HOA board had called for an emergency vote that evening, and the writing was on the wall. As much as she tried to fight it, sending frantic emails, blaming Henry, even claiming she had been misled about the mural's significance, nothing worked. The community was against her. The town was against her. Even her own HOA board members were against her. Henry, of course, made sure to attend the meeting. He arrived early, took a front row seat, and sat back with a relaxed expression as Karen tried to defend herself. "I was only trying to improve the neighborhood," she snapped, glaring around the room. "That mural was an eyesore. I was following the rules." One of the HOA board members, a no-nonsense retired judge named Martha, folded her arms. "No, Karen, you broke the rules. And because of you, we are now facing legal threats, massive fines, and public embarrassment." Karen scoffed. "Oh, come on, this is all being blown out of proportion. It's just a fence." A voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. "No, Karen, it was history." The entire room turned to see the town's lead historian, an elderly gentleman who had spent years working on the mural's project. His face was tight with anger as he held up a printed copy of the state law Karen had broken. "This town entrusted you with a position of responsibility," he said, his voice low and firm. "And you abused it. You don't deserve to lead this community." Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. The HOA board exchanged glances before Martha finally spoke. Effective immediately, Karen Whitmore is removed from her position as HOA president. Karen's mouth fell open. "You can't do this." "Oh, we absolutely can," Martha said, signing the official paperwork with a flourish. "And we just did." A mixture of gasps and quiet cheers rippled through the audience. Henry had to bite his lip to keep from outright laughing. But the final blow came when Martha cleared her throat again. "Furthermore, due to the financial liability incurred by Mrs. Whitmore's actions, we will be holding her personally responsible for reimbursing the HOA for any fines or legal costs related to this matter." Karen shot up from her seat. "What?" "You painted over a state-protected mural," Martha said dryly. "Actions have consequences." The room erupted into applause. Karen, face flushed with fury and humiliation, grabbed her purse and stormed out, ignoring the flashes of cameras from reporters waiting outside. Henry watched her go, shaking his head in amusement. She had spent so much time trying to control everything, trying to force her vision of perfection onto others. And now, she had lost everything. But Henry wasn't quite done. Because tomorrow morning, something special was going to happen. And it was going to be the perfect ending to all of this. The next morning, Henry woke up early, feeling unusually excited. Today was the day. The final piece of justice was about to fall into place. As he stepped outside, he was greeted by a small crowd gathered in front of his fence. Neighbors, town officials, members of the historical society, even the mayor had shown up. Cameras from local news stations were set up, ready to capture the moment. And right in the middle of it, all stood a team of professional mural restoration artists. Henry folded his arms, grinning as the lead artist addressed the crowd. "Thanks to generous donations from the community and a very large penalty paid by the HOA, we are officially beginning work to restore the mural to its former glory." A cheer rippled through the crowd. Henry caught the mayor smirking as she added, "And thanks to a new vote from the HOA board, historical exemptions will now be clearly documented, so certain people can't claim ignorance next time." The crowd laughed knowingly. Henry didn't even have to turn around to know that Karen was probably fuming in her house, forced to watch as everything she had tried to erase was brought back even better than before. With the cameras rolling, the artists got to work. The first stroke of bright blue paint hit the dull gray fence, officially marking the beginning of the restoration. Henry took a deep breath, finally feeling at peace again. His town's history would be preserved. Karen had been publicly humiliated, removed from power, and left with a massive financial burden. And best of all, she had no one to blame but herself. As the mural slowly came back to life, Henry turned to his neighbors with a satisfied smile. "Well," he said, sipping his coffee, "I'd say that's a picture-perfect ending."